All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining in and tuning in. Today we're going to have a panel, as you guys saw, about law fellowships and government-based fellowships. And just so you guys know who I am, my name is Melissa Lupetta. I'm a Cardinal Quarter peer advisor, meaning I help students find fellowships on campus and other resources so they can do public service opportunities in the spring and in the summer. So at the end of this, I'll be dropping in my Calendly. So if you want to meet with me, that's open to you. And myself, I've done 3 Cardinal Quarters, 2 of which were in the Bay Area and then 1 remotely. So if you have any questions about law and government fellowships, I too can be a resource to you. But we have 5 lovely panelists, and so I'll have them introduce themselves, who they are, what they're interested in, and the opportunity or Cardinal Quarter that they did. So we'll do that kind of first round of quick introductions, and whoever wants to get started can kick us off. I can also pick names. All right, Therese, I see you first.
Hi everyone, I'm Therese, I share pronouns. I'm a senior majoring in English and CSRE. And I've also done 3 Cardinal Quarters, but the only one I did in government was the one I most recently did last summer. So I know a bit about the whole virtual internship time difference thing. So yeah.
Awesome, Nicholas?
Yeah, I'm Nicholas, also go by Nico. I am a recent 2020 grad, working currently in DC, although remote work at the moment. I did 2 Cardinal Quarters, the first of which was at HHS in DC, and then the second was also in DC at the Supreme Court in the Office of the Clerk. I'm very interested in law, but also policy and kind of where those 2 things intersect.
And for folks who might not know, what is HHS?
Oh, HHS is the Department of Health and Human Services.
Awesome. Kiona?
Hey everyone, my name is Kiona. I'm a sophomore and Earth Systems major, and I did 1 Cardinal Quarter last summer at the Environmental Law program at the Richardson School of Law at the University of Hawaii. So it wasn't a law firm or anything of that sort. It was actually an academic institution, and I can maybe speak to how that's different from working at a law firm or something like that. And I'm interested in human rights and also global health and development.
I love that. And I love that you have the more academic perspective on this topic. Cool. Emily?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Emily Nichols and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore studying African and African American studies and potentially science, technology, and society. So last summer I did a SIG fellowship, which is a part of the Cardinal Quarter branch in government with the mayor of Stockton, Michael Tubbs.
And Becca?
Hi guys, my name is Becca. I'm a senior majoring in public policy and minoring in economics and history. And I've done 2 Cardinal Quarters as well, both in DC as well. One with my local congressman, Jared Huffman, and another for the Department of Education.
Sweet. Awesome. So as you can see, we have a wide range of policy experiences that are represented here, from the academic perspective to being in DC, which is I think what people usually think of when they think law and government. But there's obviously so many things in between. So the first question I have for folks is, what did you do? So what were your tasks on the job? And if you want to add kind of your day-to-day, I woke up and I got coffee at this cool place, you can do that as well. So I will kick it off to Kiona for this.
Great, yeah, so my routine consisted of waking up, making coffee, jumping onto my computer and working on a mock trial program, a mock trial problem. That was one of my major tasks. I was developing a mock trial program, sorry, I keep saying problem for use by high school students for the law schools. They have this mock trial program for the summer for students from all high schools across Hawaii, and it's free of charge. So I was developing a problem that was centered around Native Hawaiian traditional practices as well as environmental law. And so that consisted of talking with other students at the law school. So I actually interviewed a few students at the Richardson Law School who were doing research papers around Native Hawaiian, like indigenous law, because there are laws and articles written into the Constitution of Hawaii surrounding those rights, and also working on different like environmental justice issues like wind turbines in certain communities in Hawaii. And I also spent that time interviewing other people, like experts in the field, like Judge Crabtree, the circuit court judge for the Civil Environmental Court of Oahu, and just trying to get to know the lay of the land, because I had never actually participated in mock trial before. So that was one of my main things. And then toward the second half of my fellowship, when I completed that mock trial problem, I started working on a Hawaii Youth Climate Justice Colloquium with 2 other youth activists in Hawaii who are concerned with climate change. And so that also involved a lot of Zoom meetings with these 2 activists, as well as other representatives from other nonprofit organizations that we were partnering with to put on this colloquium. So I guess overall, my days typically consisted of doing independent work and logging it into the spreadsheet I used to keep track of what I was doing, and also to hold myself accountable and show to my superiors. And also every other week, I had this large meeting with all the research assistants and my supervisor to kind of check in and hear about what else is going on at the law school.
Awesome. I really love that, because it kind of combines education but activism, and sometimes people don't see that there is space for that in the law and government sectors. Awesome. So also before I bring it to the next person, I do want to say, if you have any questions throughout this from folks in the audience, feel free to message me, and then I'll be incorporating that into the questions I ask folks live. So don't feel like you need to wait till the end. So the next person is Emily.
Hey y'all, so as I said before, I work for the mayor of Stockton, but specifically with Stockton Service Corps. So Stockton Service Corps consists of AmeriCorps and just kind of like different service corps, things like justice, peace, and different things like that. That it's like basically a group of like young adults. Actually, they range from all ages who come to Stockton and do a lot of service and volunteer work for the community, and they do really amazing work. So usually I'll get up in the mornings about like 11 a.m.-ish, and we usually have a team check-in every morning. So that just includes goal setting, check-in questions, and just trying to kind of making sure that everyone is, getting the support that they need, and really just kind of a time for everyone to get to know each other in a way that we would have done if we were present, like in person, but unfortunately we were virtual. So that was kind of our way to connect. So then I will go into a meeting with my supervisor. So in there is basically us just talking. For me, I was in charge of developing a resource guide and a handbook for Stockton Service Corps members and community members in Stockton. So my work consisted of doing a lot of research on, resources that Stockton has to offer for like people who are low income and community members who maybe just need like a little extra support with food, clothing, and like mutual aid funding kind of. So then from there, in addition, like I'll spend about half of my day doing work on that. And then the rest of the day, like they made us like, we had to do a project where it's like kind of like a self-designed project on something that interests us. So for me, especially with Black Lives Matter going on and just different events like that, I was really committed to how are we ensuring that the people that we have in our office and who are in positions of power are, like really, kind of checking themselves and holding themselves accountable and ensuring that, there's that recognition of privilege and, really just doing like diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So I was in charge of developing that training. And also I was writing just like different resolutions on housing affordability and how are we making like diversity, equity, and inclusion training. How are we making diversity, equity, and inclusion training mandatory for those who are in positions of power and making those decisions. And like, I think in the meantime, like usually like I finish my day around like 2 p.m.-ish since I'm in Central Time and Stockton is in PST. So I'll just work on like the Stockton podcast and, kind of like just something fun that we did like on Instagram where it's like all of the team members got together and we kind of just spoke about our experiences, how we came to Stockton and just like different things that we wanted to see happen in Stockton over the years. So that was really fun. And also too, I was the go-to girl for social event planning. So I was in charge of like Spirit Week and like putting together like just different team bonding activities and creating a final ceremony, which was a bit rough, but we had a good time nonetheless. So yeah, that was really my experience.
Sweet. And I like that because it shows that you can still have a lively, like interactive fellowship, even when it is virtual. Because I know a lot of people feel dissuaded by it, but it's definitely possible to have like group synergy. So that's awesome. Nico, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll talk about this past summer. I was at the Supreme Court in the Office of the Clerk. So all the justices have their own clerks who rotate on a yearly basis, but there's also a clerk who deals with a lot of the administrative work at the court, particularly dealing with all the paperwork for cases, ensuring that everything's in order, that all of the petitioners are contacted, all the defendants, etc. And so I worked in that office doing two things, helping case analysts who are those dealing with incoming cases and approved cases. So they correspond directly with all the attorneys, or if there's pro se petitioners, which are individuals who are coming to the court representing themselves, then they deal with their cases. And I also dealt with corresponding with directly with attorneys, as well as those same pro se petitioners on the phone if they would call and have any questions about procedure. Yeah, exactly, pro se, exactly. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and then we would go and take a lot of the documentation, give it to the justices. If they had any questions, any concerns, anything was missing, we would deal with that as well. Yeah, and some of the cool things that we got to do is we got to meet, I got to meet all the justices, which was awesome. We would have lunches once a week in which they would bring in certain speakers. Some of the times they were justices to give us a short talk about what they did, but then we had the SEC commissioner, things of that nature, which was just super informative, super cool. And yeah, that mostly what my day entailed.
Awesome. And how about Therese?
Yeah, I realized I forgot to mention what it was that I did, but I was at the State Department Office of International Labor Affairs. And yeah, so mine was last summer. So obviously it was during COVID, and luckily I had a small intern cohort with some other Stanford students, but because the work was based in DC and I was in California, a lot of it took place pretty early in the morning. But day to day, I had to do just a very brief research report on any local or any labor issues that were occurring in the region I was assigned to for that particular period of time. So then I would do 1 to 2 of those every day, and then any additional tasks they would assign me. And then each week, there were usually several events that my supervisor would have us attend and summarize for the rest of the office. But for me in particular, I didn't have a security clearance because the program had to make some changes. But I think for future interns and for some people I know who came in right after, they were able to edit the human rights report and do more intensive things. So yeah.
Sweet. And Becca?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about what I did when I was working for Congress. It was really kind of a hodgepodge mismatch of things. So on any given day, it probably involved writing letters to constituents on various policy topics that they wrote in about, going to briefings or committee hearings and writing out policy memos for some of my bosses in the office, talking on the phone with constituents, but also included more random things like I made a history quiz when my congressman's daughter's volleyball team came to visit. So definitely a really big mix of stuff that you get to do.
Amazing. So what I liked about what everybody kind of brought forward is that there's a large range of experiences, even within like one experience. So I was curious, first, how did you learn about your opportunity? Like, I'm very curious about Nico, like Supreme Court, like how do you get that? And I'm sure a lot of our folks here are curious. And then how did you feel prepared / like learning curves? What did you learn on the job? What were maybe some challenges? So 2 things. One is how did you learn about your fellowship? And then kind of speak to the learning curves. So this time I want you guys to popcorn to each other. If you don't know who's the other panelist, it's fine. I'll direct it, but try to popcorn. So I'll start with Kiona and then you can popcorn.
Okay, awesome. So at the time when I was looking for a fellowship, I was interested in 2 things, environmental activism and also law. So I simply looked up environmental law, Hawaii, because I also wanted to be in Hawaii, which is where I'm from. And I wanted to be home with my family the summer of my freshman year, which worked out because of COVID. Anyway, so yeah, I just looked that up. And of course, the environmental law program at the University of Hawaii came up, along with a few law firms. And what I did was I just sent a pretty long cold email to the director of the environmental law program, and he wrote back to me. So cold emails work. That's one thing I learned. And I would say the learning curve, it's a difficult one. A learning curve for me was, I guess, working with people who are either lawyers studying law or law professors, just because they do work and speak and think very quickly. And I guess like the pace of work is also quite fast. So adapting to that kind of timeline in terms of like the mock trial problem that I was developing was a learning curve for me. And also just reaching out to so many different contacts and developing like professional relationships with people I didn't know prior. That was a learning curve as well that I had the opportunity to develop in this fellowship. And I will popcorn to Emily.
Yeah. So for me, I discovered the fellowship through Jan Barker Alexander. So through me, I lived in Ujama my freshman year, and Michael Tubbs is a legend at Stanford, hands down. So Jan, she has like a really close relationship with him, and she always brags about him, like Michael. And for me, I was like, I look at the work that he did at Stanford, the work that he does in Stockton, and how much that aligns with me and the work I want to do for my own community. And I'm like, yes, like this is the man I need to be with. So that made me like want to apply for like the Cardinal Fellowship, and really just trying to build that connection and see what goes on behind the scenes, so I could learn how I could take the things that he's doing in his community and bring it back to my own and continue to make that change and bring that momentum. So I ended up applying to the Cardinal Quarter, and I was definitely nervous and, like, I don't really know what's going to happen. But I think the biggest thing that I did that helped me secure the opportunity was when I told Ms. Jan that I applied, and she was able to reach out to him and say like, hey, Emily Nichols, like she's one of my fellows and she applied. So that got me on his radar. And I think for 2, I think just preparing for the interview. So like literally 2 nights before that interview, it's like I was just looking at all the policies like Michael Tubbs has done, all the work that he did at Stanford in college, like post-college and as a mayor. And, I made sure like I knew him from A to Z. So when I walked in the interview, I definitely felt confident and like, I'm prepared for this. Like, I know like this is the perfect role for me. So I think like coming into Stockton, I think there were 2 challenges that I faced. The first one was being the youngest in the internship program. Like, I have students who are getting their PhDs, who are, getting their masters, who just graduated from college, and I'm a rising sophomore. So that definitely intimidated me and made me feel like, like, do I belong here? I definitely felt the imposter syndrome, I guess you could say. So I think like the biggest thing that I did to combat that was, like just being myself and showing myself patience and gratitude throughout that process, and just reaching out and just trying to get to know everyone and build those close relationships, because while we are co-workers, I do believe in creating friends while on a job, and that's what I intended to do throughout the process. So throughout that, I kind of just let down that thing of this is an internship, and I was like, this is a place for me to learn and grow. And once I embodied that, it's like I began to build those close relationships with others. I think the second thing that I struggle with, I think, is just being Black. I think at that time, it was just hard to exist with Black Lives Matter and everything that we saw going on around the country. And it's like, I felt myself, exhausted, because not only was I doing work for Michael Tubbs, but I'm also a senator at Stanford. So we're doing advocacy, behind the scenes as well, and at Stanford as well. So I definitely felt exhausted and just, kind of depressed. And how do I keep going? But I think once again, it just came down to showing myself patience and gratitude and crafting time to really just take care of myself, and, setting time for, this is my time to work. Then this is time for myself and to nurture my spirit and, like really just replenish myself so I could come back tomorrow and do the same thing again. So I think it really just came from setting boundaries with myself and just being patient and like just honest with myself. And I'll popcorn into Nicholas.
Yeah, so the way it was kind of serendipitous. I was studying abroad in Florence, and I was just kind of looking stuff up. And one of the, I guess the guest professor who had come with us was Pamela Carlin. She is a law school professor. And one of the classes she taught was on comparing Machiavelli to Madison and kind of, the two schools of thought, being in Italy. And it just kind of got me thinking about the court. I had previously been very, very interested in health policy. But that course in particular abroad really got me thinking about how important the law is in healthcare. And especially my time the year prior at HHS also played a role in kind of seeing, all of the, legal barriers or, structures that had an impact on the functioning of the department and of the agency overall. And so I actually just looked it up, very similar to Kiana. I just, went and did Supreme Court application, Supreme Court internship, and it popped up. And I applied. I think good advice is, I'll reiterate what Kiana said and what Emily emphasizes. It's super important to cold email. I think a lot of people don't think about it. And I didn't cold email, I sent in an application, but I did, for one of the portions of the application was submitting a short essay on, who you think is, a very important justice and for what reason. And I, spoke with Professor Carlin about it. I emailed her, hey, would you be down to help me with this? And she said yes, and that's one of those things where I think it really had a big role in helping me get the internship. And in terms of the internship, the learning curve involved, I think a lot of it had to do with the corresponding directly with petitioners and with attorneys. Not only attorneys, frankly, I think the good thing about corresponding with attorneys is that they know a lot, so you don't have to fill them in on that much. But when you have pro se petitioners, people representing themselves, it often is the low-income individuals, those who are incarcerated, who are reaching out to try to appeal, and learning all the information that you need to learn so you can be as helpful to them as possible is, I think, difficult. And the case analysts are often overwhelmed. So they ask for us to take on as much as possible. And if, we eventually run into, a question or a concern that we can't necessarily address directly, then we pass it on to them. But, you're dealing with a lot of these people's, like, their lives and, their status and stuff. And so making sure that you didn't mislead them, I think is important. And also, making sure that to take them seriously. A lot of times people who are low income or, incarcerated are dealing with a lot of, situations that mental health issues a lot of times as well that, can be very, very pressing, very difficult. And a lot of times they, can say things that maybe don't make sense, but I think it's important for you to make sure you take them seriously and give them time and give them the benefit of the doubt and think about exactly where they're coming from, try to give their, I think it helps validate a lot of what they're feeling, a lot of what they're doing, when I think a lot of times society kind of, ignores them, doesn't give them the, doesn't, again, validate where they're coming from or doesn't really pay attention to them in ways that I think they obviously deserve. But again, I think that was a lot of pressure in making sure that I was comfortable talking to my superiors, those that were more experienced at the court, was super important. And I think one of the lessons I learned there is that it's super, super important to feel comfortable asking questions. A lot of times, I know at Stanford and at my workplace, it's something that I constantly have to remind myself you know, it's so much better to ask a question, even if you think it may come across as something that should have been obvious, than to go ahead and do it without asking the question, do something wrong, and have to deal with the consequences later on. So yeah, I think that's something that I would recommend to everybody, just always, is to feel more comfortable asking questions. Don't worry that much about people thinking you're stupid because, or, you know, that you're asking a dumb question, or that you should have been more prepared, because something I try to think about as well is like, how do I react when people ask me questions? I don't think that they're dumb or stupid. A lot of times people like to be asked questions because it shows that, you know, you think that they know things, you know, and they have experience. And so that's what I try to do. And I recommend, you know, others feel comfortable asking questions. God knows I ask a lot of them. So I'll popcorn to Becca.
Yeah, thanks. So I gotta also jump onto the cold email train. I got my Department of Education internship by cold emailing one of the people in the office I wanted to work on. I didn't find any information about internships anywhere on the web, and so I just figured kind of why not, and got a response, which was great. And then for my congressional internship, it was actually upperclassmen in a club I was in who really encouraged me to apply. And so I really highly recommend taking advantage of all the upperclassmen in any clubs or activities that you're involved in, because they have so much insight and information about, you know, where to find the best opportunities that you might want to experience as well. I think in both internships, particularly in my congressional internship, which was right after my freshman year, there were really steep learning curves. One, in terms of kind of an information barrier. In Congress, they used a lot of like language that, you know, you might not be familiar with if you haven't worked there before. And so I get tripped up over not knowing exactly how the appropriations process worked, or not knowing like the chair of a specific subcommittee that everyone else in my office seemed to know. And so there's definitely a lot of time where, like Nico said, you have to be really comfortable asking questions and admitting when you don't know something, because people won't think you're dumb, and it will help you ultimately to know the information. And secondly, networking. Like I didn't know how to network. I really didn't realize how important it was until the end of my first Cardinal Quarter, because I always felt like I would be kind of a burden. I didn't want to, you know, intrude on people's time. But I really think people are very open to getting to know you, to wanting to help you. And so learning that, you know, asking to spend 30 minutes with someone talking about their career isn't an imposition. It's actually something that people are really open to doing. Over to Teresa.
Yeah, so I found out about mine through a friend who was also applying, and it wasn't through Stanford. We just applied together for the State Department internships. And then I've always been really interested in labor issues. So I believe in the application, they let us rank three possible internships. And then luckily I ended up getting my first choice. But then things changed a little bit when the State Department canceled their whole internship program, but I was really set on doing it one way or another. So I basically, once I got that official email, I basically begged my supervisor. I was like, I will do anything virtually if there's any help you need. And she said, okay, I'll just create something for you that's separate. So I was really happy I did that, because even though it got canceled, the official one got canceled, I was still able to have an experience and learn a lot. And so I think one of the challenges was that I normally, in my previous Cardinal Quarters and just in most of my time, a lot of the stuff I did was grassroots organizing, especially when it came to labor issues. So making the jump from doing a lot of in-person outreach and really investing myself in the communities I was working with, to doing these very divorced from in-person connection kind of daily research reports on issues that were happening in other countries and other regions that I'm not totally familiar with, was definitely different for me. But I mean, it was still very rewarding. It was just, I just had to rethink what I wanted out of the experience and how I was going to connect it to some of the other things that I was doing. And then another challenge was that, because, like I said, I didn't have the security clearance, so there was a limitation on the amount of work I could do and what information I could access, was really just seeing what opportunities there were to sign up for more, so that I could maximize the learning experience and do as much as I could during the period of time that I was with them.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for those insights. And when it comes to asking questions on the job, do it. Chances are, especially if you're on an intern team, other people have similar questions. And in my past experience, I actually was able to catch an inconsistency in documentation because I was confused and I'm like, well, this doesn't make sense. And they're like, oh, that shouldn't be there. So you never know when your fresh eyes could actually be an asset to them because they see the same stuff every day. So thanks for that, guys. So the next question is something unexpected you learned about yourself on the job or about what you want to do in the future on the job or just what it is to be in a workplace. So it's kind of like an unexpected thing you learned. Yeah. So that's the general question. And then we'll popcorn again. And I think after that, we'll try to open it up and see if people are willing to just ask questions. So we can start with Becca.
Yeah, I think the most unexpected thing on the job was kind of how social the environment is. I was expecting it to kind of be very much down to work, like you're doing your own thing. There's a lot of collaboration, and that really wasn't the case at all. I felt like I really got to know everyone I was working with, and that's not only something unexpected, but I think a really good feature that is there to be taken advantage of. And being able to form bonds with people, whether that's the other interns or maybe your superiors in the office, is really helpful for your overall, learning experience during the internship.
And can we hear from Therese?
Yeah, so I think as much as I enjoyed the experience, it kind of reaffirmed for me how much I want to stay with local grassroots organizing work in the future, and how important it is for me to be really involved and knowledgeable and invested in the community I'm working with, because being that distanced and just typing up reports without really connecting with anybody facing these labor issues was something that I thought maybe wasn't as compatible with me for the future, even though I did learn a lot from the experience. So I found that even though I wasn't thinking this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, I still learned so much, and it helped point me towards what it was that I really am passionate about and what I want to spend my time doing.
Awesome. Emily?
Yeah, I think for me, something unexpected, I think is how fast time flies. Like for me, I thought 9 weeks, that's such a long time. And I think that while I networked, I definitely took for granted, we don't have a lot of time to really build these connections. And I think had I known that 9 weeks would fly by like that, I would have definitely done a lot more networking and really, really building more close relationships with people in the office and in different positions. Especially because unfortunately, Mayor Michael Tubbs, he didn't win his reelection. So a lot of people have branched off to the White House and, they're doing amazing work. And I was like, dang, I should have scheduled that meeting. So I think definitely just being intentional about time and building those connections and really making sure that you're putting your best foot forth at all times.
Love that. Really, really actionable advice. Kiana?
Something unexpected for me was the abundance of opportunities to do my own projects. And this was, this varies across fellowships, of course, but for me, I had a lot of opportunities to do that. And I don't know, I really appreciated that opportunity. For example, the environmental law program works closely with the Institute for Climate and Peace, which is this nonprofit in Hawaii. And through that connection, I was able to contribute to a project happening at the Institute for Climate and Peace, something completely separate from my fellowship, but very closely related in terms of theme, because my fellowship was actually centered around youth engagement in climate justice activism, in environmental law, policy, all of that good stuff. And I was able to contribute a proposal for a youth-centered indicator for this community engaged project that they were working on. So that was something unexpected. And something even more unexpected was that personal project, that opportunity, was a step into my next position, actually, because I was able to start working at the Institute for Climate and Peace in the fall, following my summer internship during my gap year, which is still happening. So I'm still working at the Institute for Climate and Peace, but because of that unexpected opportunity that I took, I was able to like develop connections and like really genuinely contribute to something that I was interested in and passionate about. And it was a double win because it opened this other opportunity for me, this other door. So it was great.
Does anyone else want to speak on that point? Kind of something unexpected you learned about yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, I learned that I actually want to go to law school. It wasn't something I thought I wanted to do prior. I was very interested in the law, but I thought, maybe, like this can be an opportunity for me to learn more about it. And on my way to, maybe return to, say, work at a think tank or, again, at a place like HHS. But I really discovered that, you know, the legal structures that undergird American society have a huge impact on the functioning of the healthcare system, which obviously touches the lives of every single person in this country. And having grown up in the Dominican Republic, I saw kind of what a faulty healthcare system that the damages that it can reap. And the United States, obviously has a pretty lackluster healthcare system as well. But compared to the Dominican Republic, it's a lot better. And so working to make sure that laws are set up in such a way that they benefit those that are most vulnerable, those that need it most, I thought was something that was particularly appealing to me. And I also really like the objectivity in law. That might sound, to a STEM school, that might sound a little weird. But compared to a lot of the world of, politics and policy, the law is it's, written down. It's about, what do the statutes say explicitly, and obviously there's wiggle room there about interpretation and the like, but what are the facts on the ground? And I like that a lot more than being involved in politics, and it's something that I'm drawn to. And yeah, it's something that I didn't expect to feel going into the internship, but it's something I definitely feel now, and I'm convinced of, and it's in my future, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Awesome. And Becca, do you want to speak on that? Also, no pressure. You can be like, no. Cool. I also want to make the point for those interested in law school, Stanford does have like a law advisor, career advisor. So make sure if this is something that's like, in your head, that you act on it, just introduce yourself to the legal like career advisor. And so that way you can just have a conversation, right? So before we turn it over to folks, I actually do want to ask one more question. And this one is about a general piece of advice for people planning on applying. And then I'm tying that also into self-care advice during the fellowship, particularly for virtual fellowships. So that is maybe a general piece of advice or a self-care takeaway. So anybody can take that, and you can also pass on the question. So anyone want to kick us off?
Sure. I would say that one thing that's been very useful to me, going back to even Stanford, about balancing work and self-care, is being very deliberate and intentional with your own time. I'm the kind of person who's, likes to write things down and organize things, and it helps take it off my mind. I think one of the things that gets me really stressed or anxious is, what could I be doing right now that I'm not doing? And what could I be working on? And so if I, when I'm feeling that way, I write exactly what it is that I need down, like a checklist or, particularly an agenda with a schedule. It helps me think, okay, no, I've thought about what it is I need to be doing. I've, mapped out the time that I'm going to need to do that. And I've also mapped out the time that I'm going to give to myself, and to just spend on, things that help me relax, whether it be exercise, reading, watching, Netflix. And I think that's something that, particularly as Stanford students, we all have that kind of drive and that, 8-type personality for the most part, where we're really focused on, doing work and, being very, very focused on, perfection and that kind of thing. And I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but, and I think it's important to make sure, like, realize that you have to set time for yourself to actually be as effective as you can be in the rest of that time. I think a lot of people get burnt out, or let's say you do spend a lot of, your whole week, 60 hours, that's not that much, 80 hours working nonstop, and then you find yourself just, that time you actually spent working, you're less effective, and you could have done way more in 40 hours had you given that other 40 to mental health and yourself. So I think it's, being very deliberate and actually taking the time to plan out your own time and not just be like, oh, when it's not working on something else. I think it's what to me has been helpful. And it's not perfect. I think that's also something that's important. It's never, you're never necessarily going to be perfect and, oh, I set up the perfect amount of time. It's, you learn, and sometimes you got to be flexible, but so.
Yeah, no, I love that. Basically being intentional, setting aside time to rest and not just setting aside time to do homework, et cetera, just putting rest on the same level as all the other must-dos we have to do. So that's great. Anyone else want to talk to that? Just general advice for students before we open it up?
Sure. I think my most general piece of advice would be not to underestimate how helpful professors can be professionally. I think oftentimes you think of that as a STEM thing, like there's a really close relationship between CS professors and students and startups and whatnot. But I think also in the social sciences space, there's a ton of room for professors to connect you to internships, to jobs, to people that they know in their network that would be helpful to you. So don't ignore them as a resource.
And for a lot of fellowships, you actually get a mentor either assigned to you or you're asked to find a mentor. So you can be really mindful of that choice, and the person you reach out to can really make a difference in your experience. Does anyone else want to give some maybe last minute tips?
Yeah, I think for me, like rest was something that I think over the summer it was a bit difficult to have, but once the Cardinal Quarter was over and I reflected, that's when I really began to understand how important self-care is, and like really taking time for yourself. And for me, I think I've kind of imbibed, like really just started to adopt a quote like you can't be 100 if you're not 100. So like for me, I always try and find ways to really just like write those affirmational thoughts and gratitude thoughts, and like for me I set aside like 1 to 2 hours every day just for like self-care. So whether that's watching Netflix, eating junk food, or just doing things that are fun. I try to prioritize self-care the same way that I prioritize homework in school and advocacy work. I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in the work and trying to, like you want to leave a good impression and you want to show your boss like you're on top of it. But I think at the same time, it comes down to how are you showing yourself patience and gratitude? And also like, how are you also not only showing up for others, but showing up for yourself as well?
Awesome. So if nobody else has a tip to add, I think we can open it up to folks. So I don't know if people are kind of open to like doing the raise hand feature or, showing themselves on camera, whatever it is, feel free to ask questions of the panelists. Or type it in the chat. That's cool too. Anybody? If not, I can keep asking questions. I just wanted to give an opportunity for folks who, you have people who did these cool opportunities right here, so take advantage of their insights. Okay, I'm gonna give like 30 seconds. Yeah, Callie?
Yeah, so I guess going to like the fellowships and internships, was there a class that like sparked your interest, or was it kind of, I guess, predestiny, I guess, before you even applied? And yeah.
That's an awesome question. Do people want to take that? About when you discovered your fellowship, was it something like that was sparked because of a particular class or maybe a particular experience? And if so, what was that?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I think one class that was really impactful on my decision to go work for Congress was a class I actually took with Melissa called Politics and Policy in California. that went super in depth into kind of all of the major issues that California is facing, both on a policy and political level. Thank you. Yes, Public Policy 154. And it's co-taught by a former advisor to Arnold Schwarzenegger and a former California state legislator. And they're both highly intelligent and highly encouraging of people going into government and public service. And so that definitely encouraged me to go work in DC.
Awesome. So we have Public Policy 154. Are there any other classes or maybe people on campus that sparked your interest or encouraged you to go this route?
Yeah, I definitely think Crime and Punishment in America with Professor Matthew Clare. You know, I think for me, I was kind of grappling like, do I want to go into law and politics for a long time? But I think that class solidified like, this is the career path for me. I think Professor Clare, he's an amazing professor. And I definitely think the class was challenging in terms of writing. Like they pushed you. But the things that I took away from that class and the things that I learned and the way that I just grew within a quarter was just phenomenal. So I definitely recommend Crime and Punishment.
I love that. I love that we're in the class recommendations part of the evening, which it's always a good place to be, especially since we tend to have a lot of, frosh log on. So if anybody wants to add classes, maybe in environmental law or like other aspects of law that they saw or did.
One thing that I would recommend, so apart from Public Policy 154, Public Policy 156, if you're interested in healthcare policy, that's taught by Joe Nation and David Crane as well. Fantastic course. And something else I'd say is like, there are some if you're interested in law, there are some classes in the law school that are open to undergrads. If you're really interested and for some reason, aren't sure, feel free to like email the professor and be like, hey, I'm an undergrad, just wondering what you thought about my taking the course. I'm super interested in the law, et cetera, et cetera. I did a couple of those, one on FDA law, which was probably my favorite course at Stanford. And I think it can be difficult. So, I mean, those credits like add 2 if you see, particularly if it's not like a course that people in the law school take, but it's a law school course. Yeah, but I think that's something that we should really take advantage of. If you're interested in the law, is we have that resource there, top 3 law school in the country, taking courses, getting to meet some of those professors, getting to know whether some law is actually something you'd be interested in. I think that's something I highly recommend.
Yeah, to that point, there's also the Introduction to Law class that is for undergrads. So that's a good literal introduction to the field. But as Nico mentioned, there are actually quite a few classes open to undergrads that are law school level. So definitely hop on that if you're interested. Any other questions for our panelists? What is the law course named again? It is Introduction to American Law. Or are you talking about one of the ones Nico mentioned? Okay, I think that's the one. So any other questions of our panelists? Or anything panelists want to just like say that they didn't get to say? Okay. Well, I am totally good with ending things early in this Zoom world, so totally fine with that. I will stay after, so if folks have any questions, whether that's like the panelists have questions or other folks have questions, again, my Calendly, I will drop a link in the chat right now as I speak, and so you can coordinate a meeting with me if you're interested in any of the opportunities mentioned here today. And also, if the panelists are comfortable with me sending their emails out to folks as points of contact, let me know and I will do that as well for students. Sweet, sweet. Thanks. Thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you guys so much for coming to the panel for those who are in our audience. And I will stop